All right. Hello, everybody. It's 2:10 and it's the last session for me today. So let's get this over with, right? Um, my name is Jennifer Hornsby, and I'm here to talk to you today about the student profile tables. These are in Data Warehouse and in PeopleSoft and in ODS. So if you use any of those systems, this is about the data that you can use. If that's not what you're here for, then please feel free to leave if you don't want to listen to me. So, whoops. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the student profile tables. These are not the student profile data that are in the Salesforce Enterprise instance that, I don't know, some of you might use. It's very similar data, but it's different. I'm going to talk about the tables, a little bit about how we use them to identify enrollment status and all the various granularity for enrollment. We'll talk about the term statistics, which is like GPA and academic level and things like that. We'll talk about new, returning, and continuing, which is what we use to identify first-year students as an example. We'll talk about how to get the major, campus, and college data out of student profile. If there's time, we'll talk about the primary record flags, and we'll talk about the snapshots. Oh, I went the wrong way. Okay, so before I go any further, I want to make sure you know that there is documentation. It's all in Google Drive, available to anyone at ASU. So you have an ASU right, you should be able to find these. I haven't figured out how to copy and paste from this laptop into the chat, so please email me after this if you'd like the links, and I'm happy to send them to you. Or most days, you should be able to just search for the word student profile, and you'll find this white paper on the left, which is just a description of what the tables are, what's the timing of how often they're updated and when each fields are updated. It gives the names that you can search for in either ODS or Redshift. And then the snapshot on the right is what the documentation of the logic for each of the fields looks like. And again, that's just a Google Sheet that you can use. So why did we create student profile? ASU implemented PeopleSoft in 2007, and we were swimming in data. We had a lot more data than we had before in our legacy SIS or data warehouse. And it was wonderful, but it was very time consuming to create reports because you didn't have to use just one table. You might have to use 30 tables, and you had to understand how to join them, what effective date to pull, all of that other stuff. It was ridiculous. And so after a year or two of that, we said, let's make this easier for everybody. So to make it easier and to ensure we could do consistent reporting so that a person in one department could get the same answer as a person in another department, we created the student profile tables. We decided to put the major information in it, their enrollment status, residency status, all of these things up here. These are things that we use most often on enrollment reports. So the logic that we decided to use, we worked with the registrar's office, provost, at the time they were called UTO, but now you're ET, and also the Office of Institutional Analysis to define the logic and what we would use these fields for. And we put them all in student profile. Most of that logic was defined back in 2009. We have made adjustments over time when ASU is very innovative, we implement new things. So for example, when we implemented standalone certificates for undergraduates or the associate's degrees, all of these new things, we had to go back in and tweak the logic. I did not do the development. This work is actually processed in PeopleSoft. So all of that coding was done by PeopleSoft developers. I just wrote the specs. and tested it. We use these tables for many of the pre-built reports that my team puts in analytics. We also happen to have kind of what I call a data dump of every field that's in the student profile table. You can just run this. We put very few parameters up at the top, but there are some, and you can just get a dump of all the fields in both of the tables. So these are the three tables. These are my babies. Aren't they beautiful? So there's student profile major by term. And what that means is it has all of the major related data about a student. It's their program plan, sub-plan campus, admit term for that plan. All of that stuff is in that table. And it's by term. Well, you might know this, but major is not natively by term in PeopleSoft. It's by date. So we decided, all those offices I mentioned together, that the effective date we would pull would be the date effective as of each term start, because that is the record that drives tuition and fee calculation. It's also the record that drives the enrollment engine that determines if a student meets prereqs or reserve capacity. So we decided those are two very important things. We should mirror that logic in this table. We could have made a different decision, but that's what we decided to do. This table has all of the multiple majors a student might be in. If they're concurrent, dual, they have a minor or a certificate or any of those things, it's all in there, which means later we'll get to the primary record flag, so you know what those things mean. The second table is called student profile by term, and that is all the information about a student that is true or not as of that term, regardless of what career program plan the student is in. So if they're in grad and undergrad, it's something about the student that wouldn't change based on any of those things. So an example would be the athlete flag. Either they're an athlete or they're not. It doesn't matter what major you're looking at. That's just an example, but I have more examples. So that is one record per student per term. There are no multiples in that table. And those two tables we often join together all the time on most of our reports. A few years later, we decided we really need a table that captures the program plan data as of today, rather than as of the term start. The use case for this is more operational. So a department wants to contact all the students in their major. They don't care if the student just changed their major today or they've always been in that college. So student profile major current has the major information as of today. It also includes all of the future admits. So students that are admitted for fall of 2024 are already in that table. The first two tables are based on the student being term activated in a term, and I'll go over what term activation means in a couple of slides. But the term activation is where all of the term related data, like being enrolled or not in classes, what their GPA is, what their academic level is, their total credit hours, those are things that aggregate by term. And so those come from the term tables. So for the third table, we don't have anything that's term specific in it. It's just program plan data about their major and their college and their admit term. So the first two are term specific, the third one is not. So I'm going to talk about the first two tables that I said we usually join together. It only includes term activated students. For any data that's not natively term specific, we use effective dating to decide the student is in this or not for that particular term. In these two tables, we do not include the non-credit career. Currently, that is what we call Global Launch at ASU. So that's all the programs under Global Launch, but it's all the for credit careers, undergrad, grad, and law. It has data from 2005 to present in Data Warehouse, because we went live in 2010 and we decided we want to go back 5 years. So that's basically why. Here is an example of one sample student's record in the first table, the student profile major by term. So this is just all the data that you might see about one person. You probably don't have time to read that right now, but it's got everything I just mentioned. Their major, their enrollment status, primary record flags. We even pulled in their name, which I don't know why we did that, but I took it off of the screenshot, but their name is in there too. So I said I was going to explain what term activation means. In PeopleSoft, in order for a student to register for classes, they have to be term activated. They can't register for the term if they're not term activated first. When we term activate them, that creates all of the cumulative data, such as all their credit hours, transfer hours, ASU hours, GPA, and academic level. So until we term activate them, that data doesn't exist about the person. When we term activate them, the student has to be admitted on or before the term that we're term activating for. I'll use spring as an example. If they were admitted for the fall, they're fine. If they're admitted for the spring, they're fine. But if they're admitted for next fall, they won't be term activated for this spring. Or they have to, continuing from an earlier term. And their program plan stack has to be active as of the term start. So if they have notified us they don't want to come to ASU and we've inactivated them, they're not term activated. If they were inactivated due to non-enrollment, they're not term activated. And what I mean by that is each career has their own rules about continuous enrollment. Generally, undergraduates can stop out for up to 7 terms and still register without applying for admission back to ASU. Graduate students are generally 1 term or 2 terms. It's really different based on whether the student is online or campus immersion. It's also different if whether they have a student visa or not. There's some different rules, but in general, that's the basic. So if we've inactivated them for not meeting the continuous enrollment rules, then they won't be term activated for the upcoming term. And that's how we stop them from registering without applying for admission again, just to meet those policy requirements. For all of those reasons, before we term activate for a future term, we have to wait until the 21st day has passed for the preceding term. So on the 22nd day of every fall and spring, that's when we inactivate students due to non-enrollment. And then later that night, we term activate for the future. So that's why no one will be term activated for fall of 24 until February of 24. So this is the same screenshot from before, but I've highlighted the fields related to enrollment status. The nicest one right here is on the bottom left, ASU enrollment status E. What do you think that means? Exactly, it's enrolled. What do you think W means? Exactly, very good. And D? Almost. Dropped. It means dropped. So there's a difference between dropped and withdrawn. And basically the only difference is, did you get a W grade? Does it show on your transcript? So if a student dropped all their classes with no W grades, that status will be D. That means they dropped before the term started. If they dropped and they have at least 1 W grade for the term and that shows on their transcript, that status will be a W. It's just giving you an indicator of when the student dropped their last class. And then an N means they never enrolled. We also have some other fields that are interesting. We have the first day they registered for the term. If they withdrew, you'll see a withdrawal date, but we can't populate that until after the term is over, because we want them to be able to re-enroll if they want to in session B. We have the academic load up here at the top right. We also have a count of how many classes they're enrolled in if they're still enrolled. So the student is in 5. We total the units they have enrolled, 15. If they have any already graded, you'll see the other fields populated, the units passed for progress and how many they have taken that are in their GPA. Here is enrollment from a few dozen students in a particular term, just showing you, I mean, really, this is just what it looks like. It's not very exciting. It's pretty basic. But here I highlighted this one in the middle where there is a withdrawal date posted, and you can see that was a medical withdrawal. Those are the only ones that get posted in the middle of the term when we know that they're not going to re-enroll. And this is just a dump of all the records for one single student over many terms. So this is over about 6 or 7 years, this student. You can see they were not enrolled. I'm sorry, I should call that never enrolled. They never registered for those terms when it's an N. And you can see, what it looks like over time. Any questions yet? Okay. All right, next I'm going to talk about the term statistics. These come directly from the student CAR term table in PeopleSoft, Redshift Data Warehouse. It's just the term history. There's really no transformation to any of them, with a few exceptions. We've pulled in the descriptions of an academic level because who knows that a 20 is a sophomore? I mean, nobody would know that, so we pulled that in. The fields that begin with UNT over on the right mean it's about that particular term. So that current term, those were the units in that term. The fields that begin with TOTE means that's the cumulative or aggregated from that term and all the prior terms leading up to it. So you'll see that pattern. It's everywhere in the student tables. And this is just a look at what a few dozen students' records look like, showing those fields that I was just looking at. Do you have any questions about the GPAs or academic levels? Okay. Now I'm going to talk about the new returning and continuing calculation, which is probably the most complex piece of student profile. It's at the bottom right of this screenshot. And if the student is a new undergraduate, then we assign another value, which is either freshman, freshman, transfer, or non-degree. So that's this one right here. So if a student is new, then we determine if they're a first-year student. I said freshman. We just changed the label a couple of years ago, and my habit is still to call it freshman. In the table, you'll actually see freshman, but we relabel it on any report that we're ever publishing to first-year student. So if the student is new and they're undergraduate and they're not non-degree or standalone certificate or visiting scholar, then, oh, I didn't say, oh, this slide needs some work. So if they're not non-degree, standalone certificate, or visiting scholar, and their high school diploma is the same year as the fall, so we're in fall of 23 right now. If they graduated from high school in 2023, they would be a first-year student, regardless of how many credit hours they have. If they had less than 12 credit hours before coming to ASU, and they did not graduate from high school in 2023, they're a new transfer student. I probably just jumbled that all up. Let me know if you want me to try to repeat. I'm going to go on though. So that's what we do for new undergraduate. It's called the new undergraduate status. We built that with input and a lot of testing by institutional analysis. The difficulty is we're calculating this in the transactional system using imperfect and incomplete data. So students can change. They can look like a first-year student until we know they have that many credit hours, and then there'll be a new transfer. So this is transactional, whereas the census data that institutional analysis publishes for the 21st day is clean and official. It's just the best we can do. That's a very good question. Just for everyone who, is there anyone online? I'll just repeat it. For overachieving high school students who have attended community college before graduating from high school, that's what you're asking, right? No, because the first factor is what year did they graduate from high school? If they graduated from high school this year, then nothing else matters. If they didn't, then we attempt in this table to do some calculations, and it's not great, to look at what the last date of their transfer credit was. So when transfer credit comes into admissions, there's a from and a to date for each of their classes. And we're using that to date, that end date, to know, was it before or after their high school graduation date? If it was before, then it doesn't count. If it was after, then we look at the total credit hours that they transferred. And it's not perfect because some of those dates are self-reported. So it won't match exactly between this and the census table, but it's the best that we can do. It's not perfect. So the first part of knowing who a first-year student is whether they're new or not. So new is fun. I'm just going to say for now, it means they were not here before, but there's a lot that goes into that. If they were here before, then in student profile, it's readmit, which I put in caps to explain that in the table. It's readmit because back in the day, they all were readmitted. Now we have quick reentry and they're not. So again, we take that code and we change it to the word returning. It's just nicer on reports. And that means that they were here before, but they were not here last semester. And last is continuing, and that means they were here last semester. That's it, basically. Good question. The question is, does summer count? No. Summer is not required at ASU. It's not required for continuous enrollment, and it's not a factor in the institutional analysis reporting of new, returning, and continuing. So summer doesn't count. They can be new in the summer, and then I say they're new again in the fall. And as far as being continuing in the fall, summer doesn't count. They would have had to be here the prior spring. And it's a little bit more than that too. So I put here, it's fall or spring only, but the enrollment has to have been state funded. And I don't have time to get into that today, but some examples of what state funded is not is ASU 10. Does anyone know what ASU 10 is? It's ASU online orientation for new students. It's a non-credit class. It shows up in the enrollment tables, but it's not state reported, so that gets ignored. There's a few other not state reported enrollments that are ignored. The enrollment in the prior term has to be the same education level that they are now. So if they're a bachelor's student now, were they a bachelor's student last semester or were they non-degree? And those categories determine whether they're continuing or they might be new again. If they were a bachelor's student and now they're a master's, they're new again. We also have some logic in there to handle visiting scholars who are only expected to be here for 1 semester or 2 semesters. We take them out. And if they return to ASU because they like ASU so much and now they're not a visiting scholar anymore, then they're new again. So here's my diagram of how we calculate new. And this is in the slide deck. So when this presentation is available, you'll be able to see it. I can also email it to anyone if you want it. But this is just the logic that we step through to determine new, returning, and continuing. All this is calculated in PeopleSoft. So in the tables, here are all the relevant fields that we look at in addition to new, returning, continuing. When someone asks, why is the student new? They were here last semester. Well, these are the fields that I look at first. So the career up at the top left, the primary record flag is important, the degree and the degree level. So down here you see education level 13 is a bachelor's degree. Master's is, I shouldn't have pretended I'm going to know this. I think JD is a 15, master's is a 17, and law is a 21. So those levels are used to know if it's the same level. And then down at the bottom right is, again, this is a new transfer student. So this is what the data looks like for a bunch of students. Whenever you see someone is new and they don't have a new undergrad status, it means they're not an undergrad. They're a grad or a law student. So that field is blank. And then here is a single student over time. So it starts in summer of 2015 and I cut it off at spring of 23. But you can see they went from freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, graduate. And then over here on the right, you see they were new. Summer doesn't count. So they were new again in the fall. Then they were continuing, then they were returning. They graduated. This doesn't show that, but that's what this means. And then they were a new graduate student. And again, summer doesn't count, so they were new the second term, which was their fall term. That makes sense? Okay. Way at the beginning, I said that for enrollment reporting, we decided to use the effective date as of the term start for reporting what college and major a student is in, because that is what the enrollment engine uses, and that's what the tuition and fee calculation engine uses. So because of those important processes, we use the same thing here. So this is what a student's program plan stack looks like. The key fields, and this is for one student, so pretend you could see the student's ID number on here. You have the career and the career number, then you have the effective date and the effective sequence. So when we're saying what was the student's major and campus and plan and all that as of each term, we're looking at the effective date, which is the third column on the left. When staff, advising staff, enrollment staff change a student's major, they can backdate and they can future date that effective date. And they would do that intentionally if they want the student to be charged the fees or they don't want them to be charged the fees. If they want them to be able to meet the enrollment requirements or they don't want them to be able to. So they know the impact it's going to have when they make the change, and whatever effective date they put on it impacts how they're counted, not just in this table, but on the 21st day. The action date is the date they did it, and that can't be backdated, or that's just the date they did it. So here's an example of another student where you can see they backdated it. So on the rows that I highlighted on January 30, well, I'll go the row above it. On January 5th, this student was in this major PP, Crim, JBS, criminal justice BS, I guess. And then on January 31st, someone processed a major change. You can see the action is PRGC, that means program change. And what they did is they added a minor. So the first row is the same as the row above it, the same program and plan. The row underneath it, over here, you can see a minor shows up, and they backdated it. They probably had to backdate it so the student was eligible for prereqs for whatever courses they needed to take for that program. Does that make sense? All right. I said I would try to talk about primary record flags. I don't have a lot of time, so I'll just say, I explained that this table has all of the majors the student is in, all of the program, career program plan and subplans. But sometimes we want just one per student per term. So we have all sorts of logic baked in there to get to one record per student if that's what you want. If you just want their primary major, then the primary record flag, it's the ASU prim rec flag, would be Y, and then you would lose all minors as an example. You might lose a lot of certificates, you'd lose concurrent degrees. If you want all of the students who have a major in a particular college. You could also do that without using the primary record flag. You would use the primary plan flag and then filter to the college that you wanted. And you would get one record per student in that college, even if it's not their primary. So it can get pretty complicated. It's flexible though, so it lets us do a lot of different things. Residency. Arizona residency for tuition purposes is term-based. But the fun thing about it is it doesn't roll every term forward. So let's say a student was admitted and resident 2 years ago. They've lived in Arizona and now they qualify as a dependent to be a resident. You would have a record for them for the fall as being a resident, but there won't be a record for the terms in between or for next term. There's only a record when we make a change. So that makes reporting on it really hard. So what we've done in here is we've just rolled it to every term to populate. So there's a record for every term. It's easier to get to. Graduation is also in this table. So if the expected graduation term is populated, that would be a term code that tells you the student applied for graduation for that term. If it's not, if it's a dash like this, either they haven't applied to graduate or they did and they were denied. They don't meet the requirements. If the completion term is populated, that means they already graduated. We do go back and update this data up to 5 years after the term ended. So if you look at a prior term, you'll see a lot of completions because we come back and we update that one field. We don't update everything else, but just that one. The second table is where we get the state funded flags and the state funded units. So I keep talking about state funded. State funded used to be what we could report to ABOR. We don't do that type of reporting anymore, but it's also tied out to what institutional analysis will report as our official enrollment for the term. So the state funded flag is important. Just know that if you use it, you'll lose some students. So if you work with students in a program, I'm gonna call them special, but they're usually contracted programs like Shanghai and Hainan and things like that. They're not state funded. We don't include them in state reported numbers or federal reported numbers. I said this table has things that are true about a student, regardless of what college or major they have in that term. So some examples other than the athlete flag is the Barrett Honors flag. We also have a yes/no flag for whether they have a hold that impacts enrollment. So if they have a financial hold, they haven't paid, and they can't register, this has an easy flag. It's just yes/no. The third table is the current major. It has all the program plan data. So career program plan, subplan campus. It's effective as of today's date, not the term start. They have to be active to exist in that table. That means if they graduated, they don't exist in the table. So as soon as we posted degrees for session A, some students disappeared from this table. They'll still be in the term-based table though. And this one also includes all of the students in Global Launch that are not in the other two, because we don't need any of the term-based data about them in this one, so they're included. Here's an example of some of the fields, so you can see, you can just see it has all the program plan data that was in the other table. It's just all of them that are active today. This one also has a little more granularity about their graduation application. So if they did apply for graduation, you'll actually see the degree checkout status. The only thing you would use that for is to know whether the student's been approved or not. Approved means as long as they complete the classes they're currently in progress successfully, they're going to graduate. Okay, so snapshots. We snapshot all of this data. We snapshot it daily, starting when the first day to enroll has passed for a term. So long before registration dates, not long before, the first day of registration appointments, we start snapshotting it daily and weekly. We snapshot more than student profile. So student profile are the last three tables on this list. We also snapshot some person data and some class data that we use to do point in time enrollment comparisons with this time last year. It's a lot of data to snapshot, but it lets us do that term comparison and reporting. So here's an example of the dates that we are using right now to compare spring of 24 enrollment with spring of 23 enrollment last year. We don't compare date to date. We compare the first day of classes to the first day of classes last year, and then we back into it. So week -1, which is, so this on the left, the yellow highlighted row that says January 8th of 2024, that's the first day of classes for this coming spring. We're comparing to January 9th of 2023. Week -1, which is right above that, you'll see is 7 days prior to each of those dates. So that's how we do it, because it's all going to line up with the 21st day. So the first day of classes we compare because the 21st day of each semester will be the same number of days apart. You see some other snapshots that are highlighted. C21 is the 21st day census. C45 is the 45th day census because we like to do it twice. And then we do it a third time for the 21st day of session B. Then at the end of the semester, and I know you can't see this because of the transcript at the bottom, that says EOT, that's the week number. It's not a number, sorry, but it's the end of term. That snapshot is taken the day after end of term processing. So if you look at the ASU academic calendar, it says final grades are due on this day. And then the next day we do repeat processing and end of term. That night we take a snapshot, and we do it then because that's when all the final grades were supposed to be turned in. That's after we have recalculated GPAs when students repeated classes for a higher grade. So that night we take a snapshot. It'd be nice if we could just take snapshots for weeks after that, but we had to cut it off somewhere. So in the snapshot tables, there are these fields. They're called ASU S-term week and ASU S-term day. And that's what I'm showing here. So each one has a record that it matches to automatically. Woo. All right. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Yes. Yes. Okay, the question is about students who have a hold for the MMR immunization, and they say that they're online and they don't think they should have the hold. The complication here is students can be both campus immersion and digital immersion at the same time. They can also be campus immersion in the fall and digital immersion for next spring. So it's all about when. The holds that you're talking about are based on being in the student group SROD, which is used to control which students can take I courses and O courses. So it is because of the students who are in more than one at the same time. I can't explain it any better in the time we have here, but that's what happens. And it's not just online. There are other locations that are excluded from the requirement. And again, when those overlap, when they are transitioning from one program this semester to another one next semester, they should still have the link so that they can provide the documentation when they're going to be on campus. But yeah, I don't know. Does that help? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yes, you could definitely look at their records in these student profile tables to get a clue what the other program is that might be conflicting. Thank you. All right, well, thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it.